السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. Alhamdulillah, by the grace and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are starting a new series of events here at the Islamic Center of Wheaton that we are going to be streaming live every week, inshallah. And if you've been following us, you will know that on Mondays we have Sheikh Ibrahim, who is doing the Quran recitation, followed by meeting the Imam, and it's an open discussion if you want to ask any questions or anything. And then on Wednesdays, he is doing a talk on the seerah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the life of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and lessons to be learned from the life of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. On Thursdays, inshallah, I will be doing this segment, and we are calling this segment the contemporary issues in the light of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, where we will be discussing, various issues that are happening in our society. So whatever issue, that we are facing in the society, we will look at it through the lens of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, try to understand it in the light of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, and possibly, look for a solution from that perspective as well. And then on Fridays, we will be streaming our Friday khutbahs, our Friday lectures, live here on our Facebook page. We will have two of them, inshallah, one at 1 p.m. and then the second one at 2 p.m. inshallah. And then on Saturdays at 9, we have Sheikh Mu'taz al-Abd, who will give us a talk on tazkiyah, on purification of the soul. So that is our weekly lineup of events that we will be streaming live right here on our Facebook page. So today's talk, inshallah, I am giving a talk on this platform, the first one now after the month of Ramadan, alhamdulillah. So given what is happening today, I thought today's subject, what better subject to talk about than the hottest issue that is on everyone's mind right now, which is this, the status of the current debate that we have on race relations in this nation. Of course, if any of us watch the news or we've been following, we will know that this is a very hot issue right now, and everyone is talking about it. You will see that, you look at the news, you read about the news, and you'll know that there is not a single state out of 50 states in this country that there isn't any kind of protest, march, or action that is going on where this discussion is happening. And of course, us as Muslims living in this country, it is very important for us to be part of this discussion. It doesn't make any sense for us to be, selective citizens of this country, in the sense that we want to, say that we are part of this country only when it benefits us, and then if there are any issues that that we are unsure about or that we deemed controversial, we don't want to have a say in that, and we want to turn away from it and pretend that it doesn't exist. Then really we're not doing anyone a favor, and we're not being a good citizen and a productive member of the society if we refuse to engage in discussions that impact our societies and our communities that we live in. So first and foremost, let's get this out of the way, that it is more than important for us as Muslims, both as Muslim institutions as well as individuals, to be part of this dialogue in whatever capacity that we can be. And there are many ways that we can go about doing that. And I'll talk about that here briefly. Now, today's talk, inshallah, will be about 30 minutes, half an hour approximately. And at the end of the talk, we're not going to be solving, the problems of this country. We're not going to be solving the problems of race relations in this country. But inshallah, I hope that it will be enough for us to understand the importance of this and the role that we should be playing in this current dialogue that the entire nation is engaged in. So first and foremost, we got that out of the way, that we have to be part of the conversation. Not being part of the conversation is not an option for us, because at the end of the day, this is an issue, this is a matter that will impact all of us sooner or later. It's not a matter of will it impact us? It will. It will. It's only a matter of time. So in order for us to understand this, I think it's important for us to first look at this issue from a statistics perspective. Since we are doing this talk on a masjid platform, and I would assume that most of the audience that will be watching this talk would be Muslims, let us look at some statistics when it comes to our African American brothers and sisters and their relationship with Islam. Now, these statistics are from a survey that was done last year, and this is from the Pew Research Institute, and they give us the following figures. They tell us that the Muslim population in this country, in this nation, out of the entire Muslim population, and now that figure also varies. Some have said, it's only 3 million versus, 5 all the way to up to 8 and 10. It varies how it's we had a little bit of a technical issue here, but inshallah we're back. So generally it's agreed upon that it's anywhere between 5 to 8 million people, between 5 to 8 million Muslims in this country, 5 to 8 million Muslims in this nation. And out of that, the survey tells us that up to 20% of them are African Americans. 20% of the Muslim population in this country are African Americans. So that tells us that it is a significant number. It's not a small number. It's not a small number by any means. 20% of the Muslims in this country are African Americans. And out of those 20%, the survey tells us that a almost half of them, half of our African American, Muslim American, African American brothers and sisters, 49% of them are converts or reverts to Islam. So out of the 20% who are Muslims, 49% of them, almost half of them, are converts slash reverts to Islam, which tells us that it's a big number. It also tells us that they understand what the religion is about. Most of the ones who become Muslim, whether you want to call them reverts or converts, they take time to study and understand the faith before becoming a Muslim. So this tells us that these figures are important figures, and they're serious numbers. And they tell us that 49% of them are converts and reverts. And you compare this to other religions in the same survey that tells us that by contrast, only 15% of non-Black Muslims are converts to Islam. Keep that in mind. Only 15% of non-Black Muslims are converts to Islam, whereas 49% of the African American brothers and sisters who are Muslims are converts, reverts to Islam. And the same survey also tells us, interestingly, it tells us that only 6% of the Black Christians are converts or reverts to Christianity. So we can see that what role Islam is playing here. We're just looking at figures right now, strictly figures. That 49% of the converts, 49% of the African American Muslim population are converts slash reverts to Islam in this country. Now, of course, all of us know that a vast majority of the citizens or the population of this country, they do agree that there is discrimination against African Americans in this country. It's not a secret. Everyone knows about this, and most of the people agree with this, that there is discrimination against African American Muslims. Now, I want you to take a step back here. When we look at the figures, we get all happy and we get excited. Yes, 20% of the African Americans, 20% of the Muslims in this country are African Americans, and we get all happy about it. And then, when it comes to the issue of discrimination, the statistics are terrible, horrible, in the sense that the same group of people who are polled for this, they tell us that 9 out of 10 African American Muslims say that there is a lot of discrimination against Black people. There's a lot of discrimination against Black people, no doubt about it. But then that adds to, when they become Muslim, that figure goes up. It's up to 92%, whereas 78% of the African Americans who are Christians say that there is discrimination, and 66% of non-Black Muslims tell us that they feel like there's discrimination. So as you can see, that it's even harder, one, to be a minority, to be two, to be an African American, three, to be a Muslim. It keeps adding on and on and on, to the point that it tells us that 9 out of 10 of the African American brothers and sisters feel like there is discrimination against them. And this number, unfortunately, exists in our communities as well. So what do we do about this? How can we address this? We as Muslims, we have an obligation to address this issue, to address this matter. As I mentioned earlier in the beginning, we have to be part of this conversation. We have to be part of the dialogue. And this starts within ourselves, within our communities, Muslim communities. And there are two parts to this. One, at an organizational level, at an institutional level, in the sense that it is the responsibility of the Muslim organizations Muslim institutes. This includes the Islamic centers, the national organizations that represent Muslims and their interest. It is an obligation on those organizations to be addressing this issue as well. And how they address it is also important. That it is not simply enough to have an event, it is not simply enough to address it, the issue of discrimination and inequality and brutality and whatever you want to call it. It is not enough for us to just have an event or just address it here and there and that's it. But to have a roadmap in place, and most importantly, to engage the community that we are claiming to help out or that we're claiming to stand up for, and that is our African American brothers and sisters. And how do we do that? And here now I'm talking about, again, as at the level of an organization, whether it's as your local masjid, your Islamic center, the Muslim organizations, Muslim schools, Muslim institutions that exist. It is important for those institutions to engage our African American brothers and sisters in a meaningful manner. That means that the African American brothers and sisters have to be part of the conversation. For example, if I am going to hold an event in regards to the issue of our African American brothers and sisters, it is important for me to make sure that I have those brothers and sisters on the panel of whatever program that I'm doing. It doesn't make sense for me to have a panel of Southeast Asian speakers speaking to us about the issue of racism against African American brothers and sisters. It doesn't make sense. Doesn't make sense at all. But unfortunately, we see this happening a lot by organizations, big and small, where we're claiming to be talking and speaking on the issue of racism, and in particular the issue of racism against African American brothers and sisters, but they are not part of the conversation. They're not on the platform. So how can we be having any kind of meaningful dialogue, meaningful discussion without them being part of the conversation? So as organizations, as institutes, this is an important step for us to make these changes if we see this happening. So if we are involved as individuals now, if we are involved in any organizations in whatever capacity that we may be, this could be a good suggestion for us to give to the organization that we may be affiliated with or that we feel that we have any kind of say in or influence in, to make sure that we engage with the community and engage it in a meaningful way, something that may that we can hope and pray and there's a possibility of us seeing any kind of results in there. It's important for us to also call out discrimination against our African American brothers and sisters in our communities, in our masajids, in our community centers. And unfortunately, it does exist. It does exist. Maybe it's not an issue that we want to talk about, that we want to address. And oftentimes we pretend that if we don't talk about these issues, hopefully they'll go away, or, people will think that they don't exist. But unfortunately, that doesn't happen. Just because we don't talk about an issue, we don't engage in any kind of conversation in that issue, doesn't mean that it doesn't exist or it's going to go away on its own. It's not. So better for us to engage in these kinds of conversations. So if we see our masajids, discriminating against our African American brothers and sisters. And this can happen in various ways. I've been told many stories by many, our African American brothers and sisters. For example, if they file a zakat application, oftentimes it's rejected for various reasons that won't make sense. And they cannot even begin to, come to terms with, why it may have been rejected. And then the discussions that happen behind the scene are things that, we can't even imagine that are talked about. Oh, we don't want to give them money. Oh, they're just going to use that money to buy drugs, to do something bad. Oh, they're just going to buy, some alcohol with that. How do you know that? You don't know that. And you're making assumptions, basically, And, if we know of these issues that exist in our communities, then we should raise those issues. Because if we don't, then these issues are going to continue. And that's just a very small example that I gave you. It's important for us to engage with all members of our communities, black, white, male, female, rich, poor, Hispanics, Asians, Caucasians, our African American brothers and sisters. It doesn't matter. And this is the beauty of Islam. And I'm not going to give you a lecture on, there's no racism in Islam. We all know that. But it's time for us to act upon that and demonstrate that to ourselves and to the communities that we are living in, that, truly there is no discrimination in Islam. So from an organizational perspective, those are some things that we can do to address these matters, engage the community, listen to them, and see how is it that we can help them. How can we be part of the conversation? What are the issues that they're facing? Let's start with things that you and I think that we have under our control, or that we think that we may have a say in. What can we do to make them feel welcomed at our masajid, for example? What are some of the services that we can offer to them? And that would be a starting point. Now, on an individual level, it's a different story. It's a different story in the sense that this is something that is going to vary from person to person, from families to families. Not everyone is going to be able to do the same thing. All of us are different. We all have our different skill sets. And all of us can do what we can do best to, educate ourselves. And that would be the first and the most important thing that I would say for us as individuals, to educate ourselves on the history of the African Americans in this country. And unfortunately, the Muslims, from what I have seen, from my experience, we are very weak in our knowledge in regards to the history of African Americans in this country. Most of the Muslims, if you ask them, what do they know about, African Americans in this country, you're not going to get past, a few names. They'll tell you, oh yeah, Muhammad Ali. He used to be not Muslim before, then he used to be Cassius Clay before, and then he became Muslim and he became Muhammad Ali. Alhamdulillah. We may know that. Okay. Or, they'll tell you, African Americans, Martin Luther King. He had a dream. He gave that famous speech. And then maybe a few names here and there that we may have heard in the news or someone told us about. Rosa Parks. She refused to give up her seat in the bus. That's pretty much all the history that we know. But if we really want to engage in a meaningful dialogue, first thing that we should do is to educate ourselves on the history of the African Americans. Forget about Muslims. We must start from the beginning. The history of African Americans in this country. If we don't understand the history, then we are not going to be able to understand the problem. This problem that we see today did not start 2 weeks ago with the killing of George Floyd. It did not start 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago with the killing of George Floyd. This is a systematic issue that exists in this country. And most of the scholars and historians and analysts, they agree with this, that it is a systematic issue. It's not just an issue of law enforcement or police brutality. That's just a small part of the bigger issues that exist in this country. So in order for us to be able to understand this, what we can do on a personal level, number one is, as I mentioned, educate ourselves on the history of African Americans in this country, the struggles that they have gone through, and then of course educate ourselves in relation to Muslims, African American Muslims in this country, and you will realize and understand the sacrifices that were made. Today, the $1 million, multi-million-dollar institutions that we have, masajids that we have, schools that we have, all of them are built on the shoulders of the sacrifices that were made by the African American brothers and sisters. Most of them are. The Muslims, from from the Arab countries and then from India and Pakistan, they came to this country much, much, much later on. Islam existed in this country much before that. And it was our African American brothers and sisters who were at the forefront of that. And if we don't know this and if we don't understand this, then we're doing ourselves a huge, huge, misfavor if we don't understand the history. Last thing, what we can do on a personal level is to address this issue of discrimination within our families, within our relatives, within our friend circle, because it does exist, whether we like it or not. There are only very few families who have made an actual attempt to address this and eradicate this problem from their families, the communities. Oftentimes it is looked at as something normal or something that we can joke around with without realizing the consequences of that. And I will give you one example of this before we end for today. And the example is, for the Muslim community of, the South Asian Muslim community, India and Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, because that's all within the same area. And one of the things that that unfortunately exist in the community is the issue of color is a serious matter, in the sense that anyone that is black is looked down upon naturally. And no one can say any different, that, oh, no, it doesn't exist. No, it does exist. You know it, I know it. And unfortunately, derogatory terms are used, and they've been used to such a degree that it became the norm. Unfortunately, it became norm of the conversation. So if we see a dark-skinned brother or sister, we refer to them by the name of the color, by saying, so and so is kala, which means black, aswad, black. And we refer to them with these colorful names, kala or kallu or kalia. These are words that we hear in our communities, and oftentimes it is just passed off like it's normal. It's part of the conversation, but it's not. It's not normal, and it's not part of the conversation. And we must do everything that we can to make sure that this is not passed on to our future generation. And it's important for us to understand where this came from. And when we look at this historically, we look at the countries of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. All of that used to be one, and unfortunately, it was under the rule of the British, which introduced a lot of these concepts in the society. And it's no secret that there was a lot of discrimination, and from there, this understanding came about that people who are dark skinned are lower than us. The British, they used to put up signs, just like we saw signs here in this country in the 40s and the 50s, even in the early 60s. Colored people are not allowed. Water fountain, whites only and colored only. That kind of system also existed in in the Indian subcontinent under British rule. Even today, you can look at books, you can look at pictures, and you'll see that they used to have signs up there, signs posted, such as dogs and Indians are not allowed, whether it was the movie theaters or some restaurants and so on and so forth. And that is where all of this came from. That's where all of this came from. And unfortunately, it was made so normal that anyone with dark skin is looked down upon, and we give them this name, and we act like it's normal. But it's not normal. It's not something that is good for us. It's not a good conversation to have. It's not something good that our African American brothers and sisters would appreciate this. Absolutely not. So if we see this in our society, in our families, in our relatives, we must change this. Change starts from within ourselves. Then we can work our way to the communities, to our masajid, to organizations. But if we ourselves are having these issues internally, then it's going to be difficult for us to call for any kind of change outside if we ourselves are not practicing this. So there are two parts to this as we come to the conclusion of today's talk. Number one, look at the statistics, and we will see that the African American Muslim brothers and sisters, they form a big part of our community, and we must take that into consideration. Number two, actions that can be taken, and there are two types. One, at an organizational level, and two, on an individual level. Organizational level, we must engage with our African American brothers and sisters in a meaningful dialogue, and by making them part of the conversation, by not making them the conversation, but part of the conversation. They must be given the platform. They must be given an opportunity to share with us what they are experiencing, what they have experienced, and ways that we can help them and assist them during these difficult times. They have to be part of the conversation. Three, on an individual level, if we see any kind of discrimination that is occurring, whether it is in our homes, whether it is with our families, our relatives, or even in our masajid, then it must be called out. It can no longer be ignored. If we lay claim to be Muslims, to be followers of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to be lovers of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then we must act upon the teachings. It's not just simple lip service that all of us know. Oh, the first muezzin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was African American. He was Bilal radiallahu ta'ala, and that's all we know. What are we doing with the people who are of the same skin color of Sayyidina Bilal radiallahu ta'ala? Are we treating them the right way? Are we equal with them? Are we fair with them? If we're not, then those are things that we need to work on. So these are some things that we can do, as I mentioned, at an organizational level, and it will vary from organization to organization, from institute to institute. And individually, it will vary from what we can do, each one of us. And I will end with the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam that you may have heard of before. It is a famous hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam where he tells us, "Man ra'a minkum munkaran falyughayyirhu biyadihi, fa illam yastati' fa bilisani, fa illam yastati' fa biqalbihi, wa dhalika ad'afu al-iman." The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, whoever of you sees an evil, let him change it with his hand. If you have the ability, if you have the capability, if you have the strength, if you are in a position to do something about it, of something that you see that is evil, then you should do it. Change it with your hand, change it physically. If you're not in that position, the Prophet ﷺ says, فَإِلَّمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِلِسَانِهِ, do it with your tongue, meaning speak out against it. Whether it is by your voice, whether raising your voice against it, whether writing against it, whatever means that you can utilize to raise awareness about it, then you should do so. فَإِلَّمْ يَسْتَطِعْ فَبِقَلْبِهِ, if you're not able to, then at least feel bad about it in your heart. وَذَلِكَ أَضْعَفُ الْإِيمَانِ, the Prophet ﷺ says, that is the lowest level of iman. Change it physically. If you have the ability, change it with your hand, do it. If not, speak out against it. If not, the least that you can do is at least feel bad about that in your heart. And maybe that will lead you to the next level of iman, inshallah. So these are some of the things that we can do, inshallah, to address these issues in our community. They do exist. Because we don't talk about it doesn't mean that they don't exist. They do exist, unfortunately. But inshallah, together we can overcome this. There is work for us to do, and we can do it, inshallah, if we follow in the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We can address this issue if we abide by the teaching of the Quran and the Sunnah. Then we can eradicate this issue as well, inshallah. And that will bring today's talk to an end, inshallah. And next week we will cover a different topic, a different suggestion, inshallah. If you have any suggestions that you would want to hear about or hear us address it, you can reach out to us, comment on this video. If you're watching on Facebook, you can comment in the comment section, or you can send us an email at the email address that you see on your screen, which is info@icwonline.org. You can send us an email, give us ideas, suggestions, what you want us to talk about, what you want us to hear discuss, what issues, contemporary issues that are impacting you, your family, your loved ones, you as individuals, what issues you want us to talk about, and inshallah we will discuss them and shed some light on that from the perspective of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, inshallah. So inshallah, tomorrow, Friday, we will stream the Jummah Salah khutbah, inshallah. The first one at 1 p.m. and the second one at 2 p.m. inshallah. Now, if you are planning on coming to the masjid, you must register, and you will see the instructions here on the screen now. You must go to icwonline.org/salah, and it will take you a couple of minutes to register yourself. And once you register, you'll get a QR code in your email. Just come to the masjid with that, and inshallah, you'll be able to attend the salah at the masjid. And of course, there are other precautions that we are asking you to take, such as make sure that you bring your mask, that you're wearing the mask at all times at the masjid. Bring your own prayer rugs. Have your own mask with you. Perform wudu at home before you come to the masjid. The wudu facility is not available at the masjid currently. Make sure you do wudu at home before you come to the masjid. Have your mask. Be wearing your mask at all times. bring your own prayer rug. If you are sick, if you are feeling sick, ill, coughing, sneezing, whatever it is, then we ask you kindly not to come to the masjid and pray at home. Pray at home, inshallah. We will be taking temperatures when you come to the masjid, and if the temperature is normal, inshallah, you'll be permitted. If for whatever reason it's not, then you will be asked to come back at a later time, inshallah, when you are feeling better. All of these requirements are there. All of these rules and regulations have been put in place for everyone's safety at the masjid. We hope and pray that inshallah you will abide by those rules and regulations in the interest of safety for everyone, inshallah. With that, inshallah, I will see you next week for another episode of Contemporary Issues in the Light of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala khairi khalqihi سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين والحمد لله رب العالمين.